Hello, and welcome to G Fun Facts Online, the show that digs into the fascinating stories behind the world we live in. Today, we're talking about something that, for many, is the biggest dream and the biggest purchase of their lives: owning a home. But what if I told you that for millions of people, especially in places like England and Wales, owning their home doesn't mean what they think it means? They're caught in a strange, centuries-old system where they own the bricks and mortar, but not the ground underneath their feet. This system is called leasehold, and it's been the source of financial nightmares for countless homeowners. But the good news is, a revolution is underway. A massive legal overhaul is happening right now, designed to rip up the old rulebook and create a new, fairer dawn for homeowners. So stick around as we unravel the strange history of leasehold, expose the problems that turn dreams into traps, and explore the landmark new laws that are changing everything. Let's start with the basics. In the world of property, there are two main flavors of ownership: freehold and leasehold. Think of freehold as the full package. When you own a property freehold, you own everything: the building, the garden, the driveway, and crucially, the land it all sits on. You own it forever. It's yours to maintain, to change, to pass on to your children. It's the gold standard of homeownership. Then, there's leasehold, and this is where things get complicated. When you buy a leasehold property, you're not buying the property and the land indefinitely. You are buying the right to live in that property for a fixed, albeit very long, period. This is laid out in a contract called a lease. This lease could be for 99 years, 125 years, or even 999 years. But the key point is, it's a countdown. And when that countdown hits zero, legal ownership of your home snaps back to the freeholder, the person or company that owns the land itself. You're essentially a long-term tenant, and the freeholder is your landlord, even though you've paid hundreds of thousands of pounds for your home. This system is very common for flats and apartments because it provides a legal structure for managing a building with multiple owners, things like shared hallways, roofs, and gardens. But controversially, many new-build houses have also been sold as leasehold, which has caused a lot of anger. So where did this bizarre system, that sounds like it belongs in a history book, actually come from? Well, that's exactly where it's from. The roots of leasehold stretch all the way back to the feudal system of medieval England. You had the king at the top, who owned all the land. He granted large chunks of it to his lords, who in turn leased it out to tenants in exchange for rent or services. It was a pyramid of power built on land. This fundamental idea of separating the ownership of a building from the ownership of the land it's on survived the centuries. During the Industrial Revolution, as cities boomed, developers found it incredibly profitable to build houses and sell them on long leases. This way, they could get the big payday from the sale, but also keep ownership of the land, creating a steady stream of income for generations. The post-war building boom of the 1950s and 60s, with its surge in tower blocks and flats, cemented leasehold as the go-to model for managing these complex buildings. But what started as a practical, if ancient, solution has, for many, morphed into a nightmare. The system created a huge power imbalance between the freeholder landlord and the leaseholder homeowner, leading to a host of deeply unfair problems. One of the most scandalous issues has been escalating ground rents. Ground rent is a fee the leaseholder pays to the freeholder, just for the right to have their home on the freeholder's land. Traditionally, this was a tiny, symbolic amount. But in recent years, some developers wrote toxic clauses into leases where the ground rent would double every 10 or 15 years. Imagine buying a home with a ground rent of £250 a year. Sounds manageable, but with a doubling clause, in 30 years it's £2,000 a year. In 60 years, it's £16,000 a year. These clauses have made properties effectively unsellable and unmortgageable, trapping homeowners in a financial prison. Then there are the service charges. Leaseholders have to pay for the upkeep of the building's common parts. This makes sense, in principle, but the problem has been a shocking lack of transparency. Homeowners would receive enormous bills for repairs or maintenance, with little to no detail on where the money was actually spent. They were forced to pay, with very little power to challenge costs that seemed inflated or for work that was done poorly. Another fundamental problem is that a leasehold property is a wasting asset. Remember that countdown timer? As the lease gets shorter, the value of the property drops. This becomes a critical issue when the lease term falls below 80 years. At that point, it becomes very difficult to get a mortgage on the property, and therefore very difficult to sell it. Your home, your biggest asset, is literally losing value every single day. And if you wanted to do anything to your own home, like build a small extension or even change the windows, many leases contain clauses that mean you have to ask the freeholder for permission, and they can charge you hundreds or even thousands of pounds just for that consent. Finally, while there have been ways for leaseholders to escape, either by extending their lease or by banding together to buy the freehold outright, the process has historically been notoriously complicated, incredibly expensive, and a legal minefield that many people simply couldn't afford to navigate. All of this created a crisis. A growing chorus of trapped homeowners, campaigners, and politicians demanded change, and that change has finally arrived. In response to the public outcry, the UK government has passed a landmark piece of legislation, the Leasehold and Freehold Reform Act 2024. This act is designed to rebalance the scales and inject some much-needed fairness into the system. It received royal assent on May 24, 2024, and it brings in some truly transformative changes. So what are the big game changers in this new law? First, it's set to become much cheaper and easier for leaseholders to extend their lease or buy their freehold. A key part of this is scrapping something called marriage value. In simple terms, marriage value was a bonus payment to the freeholder. Because extending your lease makes your property more valuable, the old law said you had to give a cut of that increased value to the freeholder. It was like having to pay your landlord a bonus for improving your own home. That's now gone, which should make the process significantly cheaper for many. Second, the standard lease extension term is being massively increased to 990 years. Previously, you could only add 90 years to a flats lease. Now you can extend it to 990 years at what's called a peppercorn rent, which means a rent of zero. This gives homeowners incredible long-term security. A 990-year lease is, for all practical purposes, as good as freehold. Third, the Act abolishes the 2-year ownership rule. Before, you had to have owned your property for at least 2 years before you could even start the process of extending your lease. This rule was officially scrapped from January 2025. Now you can buy a property with a short lease and begin the extension process from day one, giving you much more flexibility and bargaining power. The new law also tackles those opaque service charges. Freeholders will now have to use a standardized format for their bills, making it far easier for leaseholders to see exactly what they're paying for and to challenge any costs that seem unreasonable. And in a huge symbolic move, the Act bans the sale of new leasehold houses, except in very specific circumstances. This aims to stop the problem at its source, ensuring that future homebuyers who purchase a house will own it freehold, as they should. Now, while the Act is officially law, not all of its changes happen overnight. Some parts, like the abolition of the 2-year rule, are already in effect. Others will be rolled out through 2025 as the finer details are worked out. The government has a timeline for these reforms, and it's a space worth watching. But the conversation around fixing the leasehold problem has also brought another, even better, alternative into the spotlight: commonhold. Introduced way back in 2002 but rarely used, commonhold is a different way of owning property. With commonhold, you own the freehold of your flat or unit forever. There is no lease, no countdown timer, and no external freeholder. Instead, The building's common areas, the roof, the hallways, the gardens, are owned and managed jointly by all the flat owners together through a company called a commonhold association. The advantages are huge. You have perpetual ownership. There's no ground rent to pay. There's no risk of losing your home over a dispute. And crucially, you and your neighbors have direct control over how your building is run and how your money is spent. Despite these obvious benefits, commonhold has struggled to take off, largely because the old leasehold system was so entrenched and offered big financial incentives to developers. But the government has now signaled its commitment to making commonhold the default option for all new blocks of flats in the future, which could be the final nail in the coffin for the old feudal system. So, what does all this mean for you in practical terms? If you are one of the millions of existing leaseholders, this is fantastic news. The new laws should make it significantly more affordable and straightforward to extend your lease, which adds value and security to your home. You'll also have more power to scrutinize and challenge those service charges. And the growing push towards commonhold might one day offer you a path to true, complete ownership. If you're currently looking to buy a flat, the landscape is shifting in your favor. The removal of the 2-year ownership rule is a major win, as it means a property with a short lease is no longer the red flag it once was. However, it's still absolutely vital to do your homework. Check the length of the lease on any property you're considering and get a clear picture of the current service charges. The road ahead is still being paved. The full impact of these reforms will become clearer as they are fully rolled out, and there may be legal challenges along the way. But the direction of travel is unmistakable. This is a fundamental rebalancing of power, away from a system that often felt exploitative, and towards a future where homeownership is more secure, more transparent, and fairer for everyone. For the millions of people who have felt trapped by their leases, this overhaul isn't just a change in the law, it's a beacon of hope and the promise of a brand new day. Thanks for tuning in to G Fun Facts Online. Join us next time for another deep dive into the world around us.